Here on CBS Sports HQ, it's pretty good news for Rams fans because their star wideout Puka Nacua will return this week. Puka has been dealing with an ankle injury, and he's going to be back in action against the Saints after missing the Rams' most recent win against the Jaguars in London. So we're going to break it down, and what does this all mean for your fantasy team? For that, let's welcome in our fantasy expert, Heath Cummings. Heath, Puka coming off the injury report. How big of a boost is this for managers who have Puka on their team?
Enormous. He is my number 3 wide receiver this week. Nobody would be surprised even a little bit if he was the number 1 wide receiver this week. I've received all kinds of injury news in the last 24 hours from my fantasy team. The Puka Nacua news is the good news. The rest of it, it's the bad news.
Yeah, and we're going to get to some of the bad news, Travis Hunter, all of that stuff. But Puka Nacua, too, what are your expectations overall? I know you said he's your number 3 wide receiver at this point. So are you expecting him to kind of just get back on track to the Puka that we know and love?
Yeah, I usually try to give like a 10% discount on a player's projection in their first game back from injury. And that tells you how incredible he was before he was hurt. That you take 10% off the top, he still projects as the number 3 wide receiver. And you can see I'm not on an island here. Jamie number 3, Dave number 2, Sportsline number 1. It's him, it's Jamar Chase, it's JSN. These are the week winners, the league winners, hopefully, if they can stay healthy.
Okay, yeah, top 4 in the rankings, top 3, excuse me, for everyone. Want to talk about some of the bad injury news, right? So Rhamondre Stevenson, he is out. So what does that mean for the rest of that running back room there and the rest of the offense really in New England?
Well, I think a lot of people who have Travion Henderson also view this as good news for their fantasy football team. But we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Travion Henderson to see a bigger share of the workload. He's been more efficient as a rusher. It seemed like last week they really started giving him more of the carries on the edge that he's more likely to succeed on. And now with Rhamondre Stevenson out, we're hopeful, cautiously optimistic, because there is this little strange thing going on with him and Mike Vrabel, and Vrabel not wanting him to play him as much as all of us want him to be played. So I'm viewing Henderson as a low-end number 2 running back this week who has the potential to be a top 12 guy and has the potential that if he does what the guy most of us think he will, to just become the starting running back for the Patriots rest of season. So it's good news for him. If you lost Stevenson, there's not a lot of guys still on the waiver wire that you're really looking to. You're probably going to your bench. If Brashard Smith happens to still be out there, we like him as a high-end number 3 running back. If Emmanuel Wilson is out there, he's sharing time with Josh Jacobs. He could be a different guy, decent guy to fill in. But most of the waiver wire guys, of course, scooped up by Friday afternoon.
Of course. All right, let's circle back and not to, add insult to injury for you, Heath, but we got to talk about Travis Hunter, of course, unfortunately placed on IR, dealing with a knee injury. I'm someone who has Brian Thomas Jr. on my roster, or one of them. So in my mind, maybe this is optimistic. We're waiting for BTJ to get going. So are you expecting maybe more targets for him?
Targets haven't really been the problem for Brian Thomas Jr. He has more targets per game this year than he had last year. It's catching those targets. And thankfully, for the most part, drops are not that predictive. And if you want to look at evidence of that, he played his entire rookie season and had fewer drops than he's had in the first 7 games of this year. So I am a little bit optimistic. I think you could view him as a high-end number 3 wide receiver who, again, like Henderson, has the potential to be a guy that finishes as a top 12 and just is the guy we thought he was. The other side of this is Trevor Lawrence against the Raiders was looking like the top streaming option. He was as high as QB 14 in my projections at the beginning of the week. But when you're throwing to Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, and De'Ami Brown, it's a little bit different than when you have the upside of someone like Travis Hunter. So Lawrence has kind of fallen a little bit. He's in the low teens now, more of a QB2 than someone you want to start in a 1-quarterback league.
All right, let's go to Atlanta because we have Michael Penix Jr., Drake London, both coming off of the injury report. So where are both of these guys in your rankings now?
Well, Michael Penix Jr. is well behind where Trevor Lawrence is. He's a low-end QB2, and we're hoping you don't have to use him. The Falcons don't have a very high implied total in this, and they score more on the ground than they do through the air anyway. Having London obviously helps him. London is someone that I'm not quite as optimistic coming back as Puka Nacua. First off, he wasn't as good as Puka Nacua when they were both healthy. Second off, he hasn't quite dominated targets when Darnell Mooney's been there like he has when Mooney has been out. So I think you view London as a low-end number 2 wide receiver. I think based on the name, nobody's probably sitting him, but he's also not someone that you expect to really win you your week. Not necessarily a good matchup against a Patriots pass defense that was pretty bad earlier in the year, but has been pretty good since Christian Gonzalez came back, and London should see a lot of Gonzalez in this matchup. This really ruins Darnell Mooney's appeal as a number 3 wide receiver, more of a what-the-heck flex now than he was at the beginning of the week. I think you're still starting Kyle Pitts with London back, though.
Okay, and Heath, we have a lot of folks in our newsroom that have DeAndre Swift on their fantasy teams. He's ruled out for Sunday against the Bengals. It was a lot of sighs, a lot of groaning, a lot of upset people upstairs. So how do you handle that if you have DeAndre Swift?
That's also what you heard in my living room when the news was announced, because I may have drafted more DeAndre Swift than anyone. This looks like a pretty clear 1-to-1 comp with he and Kyle Monangai. Monangai's been relatively efficient as a rusher. They've been willing to use him in the passing game. The number 3 running back for the Bears, Roschon Johnson's going to miss his second week in a row with a back injury. So it's just Monangai and Travis Homer at this point. Homer's not a guy who's going to get a lot of carries. So you're probably looking at 18 touches for Kyle Monangai against arguably the worst run defense in the NFL. At the beginning of the week, I had DeAndre Swift ranked as a top 12 running back. Without DeAndre Swift, I have Kyle Monangai ranked as the number 13 running back. I would start him over TreVeyon Henderson. I would start him over Tyrone Tracy, another injury replacement. I'd start him over Bam Knight. I'd start him over Rico Dowdle. I think Kyle Monangai looks like a pretty surefire starter for you without Swift.
All right, let's go to the Bengals side of things, because Joe Flacco is questionable. Not what Bengals fans want to hear. He has a shoulder injury. And Heath, I know you talked about Jamar Chase. Obviously, he's going to be in the top 3, top 2 when it comes to wide receiver rankings. But if Joe Flacco doesn't play, how much does this impact not only Jamar Chase, but also T. Higgins in your rankings?
Well, and it also impacts Flacco because he's a top 12 quarterback for me this week, also with a good matchup against the Bears. So you'd have to go find another starter there if you're planning on starting Flacco. Thankfully, they sound relatively optimistic. But if Flacco were to miss this week, Jamar Chase is still a must-start wide receiver. He wouldn't be in that top 3, though. It would just be JSN and Puka Nacua kind of by themselves in that tier. And you'd see Chase probably ranked as a low-end number 1 wide receiver. We've seen him have a little bit of success with Jake Browning in the past, but nothing like what we've seen from Joe Flacco. The guy who would really be impacted, T. Higgins, who only had the long touchdown catch last week. But he's a pretty clear start as a wide receiver 2 for us when Joe Flacco is starting. If Jake Browning's the starter, T. Higgins is going to fall all the way outside of my top 30, maybe out of my top 36. He's just had no success. And Chase Brown also has averaged 2.5 yards per carry this year when Joe Flacco did not start. He's averaged 7 yards per carry when Joe Flacco did start. He has a decent but complicated matchup because the Bears' run defense has been better since TJ Edwards came back. So I would be much more hesitant to start Chase Brown as well if Joe Flacco's out.
Okay, and let's go to the Chiefs-Bills matchup. Always a lot of fireworks here. Isiah Pacheco for KC ruled out for this matchup against the Bills. So what does this mean for Kareem Hunt?
Well, I said the Bengals were arguably the worst run defense in the NFL because the Bills definitely have an argument as well. We expect Kareem Hunt to lead this backfield. I've got him projected for 14 rush attempts and a target. He's certainly the most likely Chief to score a touchdown in a game that has an over-under over 50. So I think you can view Hunt as a low-end RB2. He's behind TreVeyon Henderson, who we talked about, definitely behind Kyle Monangai. But someone that you definitely can start in a pinch and a great fill-in if you lost Rhamondre Stevenson. Brashard Smith, more their pass-catching back. He had a decent run last week, but it was called back because of penalty. Hasn't found much success on the ground. So I'd view Smith as more of a high-end flex. As bad as the Bills have been against the run, they've been really good against pass-catching running backs this year. Smith's right around RB30 for me.
Okay, and finally, want to talk about Alvin Kamara, questionable against the Rams. We know it's a new quarterback, so I don't know if they'll be super pass heavy. We'll see, right? So what does this mean for that running back room in general, especially Kamara is questionable?
Yeah, for most of the Saints, we think Tyler Shuck's probably going to be a small downgrade, at least for his first couple of starts versus Spencer Rattler. It would be hard for anybody to be a small downgrade for Alvin Kamara. They just are not using him like he's been used in the past. They're always playing from behind. They have an implied point total of 15.5 this week, which is the second lowest on the slate. So we don't like Alvin Kamara very much if he plays. He's just kind of barely hanging out in that RB24 range. Basically all the injury replacement running backs we've talked about, except for Brashard Smith, I would start over Alvin Kamara. If Kamara for some reason can't go, they've already lost Kendre Miller for the year. It would be a big role, well, as big as it gets in New Orleans, for Devin Neal, and he would move into that high-end flex range right around a Brashard Smith. Another thing we heard this week from their head coach is that they'd like to get Taysom Hill a little bit more involved. I think that would definitely be the case if Kamara was out. And we might have to move Taysom Hill up closer to starting tight end range.
All right, Heath, it is that time of the segment where I have not one, but two personal fantasy questions that I would like to run by you, neither of which are injury related, but whatever. While we have you on TV, we're going to ask, or I'm going to ask. So this kind of circles back to the Travis Hunter conversation where you were talking about Trevor Lawrence has dropped a little bit in your rankings. You don't have a wide receiver who has that high upside. I have T-Law on my bench, and I'm currently starting Jackson Dart. What do you like better, sticking with Jackson Dart against the Niners or taking a risk on Trevor Lawrence, although he is facing the Raiders, not having that option in Travis Hunter at wide receiver?
Well, I do believe that we've only been able to talk 3 times this season on Friday, and I think all 3 times you have asked me a question about Trevor Lawrence, and my answer has been something like, are you playing in a 2-quarterback league? Why are we still talking about Trevor Lawrence? No, as good as Jackson Dart has been, I have some questions about the sustainability of how they are getting that done, but the 49ers defense is unrecognizable due to all the injuries they've suffered. So I do think that Jackson Dart over Trevor Lawrence still makes sense. You've made the right call.
Okay. I mean, my team name is Duval versus all y'all, so I think it's a homer thing that I keep going back to Trevor Lawrence. And then one more. Our producer, Tito, has proposed a trade to me for a different fantasy team, and I want to run it by you just to make sure that I'm not getting bamboozled here. He wants to give me Devonta Smith and Matt Stafford for RJ Harvey. And actually, this is, I believe, in the same league where I have Jackson Dart and Trevor Lawrence.
So the bad news is you'd have to drop Trevor Lawrence if you made this trade. That's not really bad news. So I want to make sure I understand correct. This is just a 1-year league. It's not a dynasty league.
Yes.
And he's offering you both Devonta Smith and Matthew Stafford for RJ Harvey.
Correct.
Yeah, you should accept that before he changes his mind and takes it back because he's giving you a gift.
Okay, I don't think it's a bad trade, and I'm also wondering if Tito texts you on the side because he knew I was going to ask about this on air.
100%.
Okay. I thought so. Tito's sneaky like that, right? All right, Heath, we certainly appreciate it. Helping us win our fantasy leagues and walking us through the Friday injury report and what it means for your team. Heath, Jamie Eisenberg, Dave Richard, you can hear them on the Fantasy Football Today podcast. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.